Colin Robertson, thanks a lot for speaking to CNN News 18. You're a former Canadian diplomat. You have served in the US and Hong Kong and other places. I want to begin by asking you about the recent standoff between India and Canada. Now, India had made it clear at the start of this fight that they do want parity to be maintained as far as the number of diplomats in each country is concerned, and they wanted Canada to reduce its strength here. And post that, what has come to light is that they have given an October 10 deadline for Canada to take back as many as 40 diplomats. How do you see this, India's demand to maintain parity, and the fact that Canada, the Canadian Prime Minister has now said that they will do private talks with India on this?
Yes, well, I don't think it makes any sense. The whole point of having diplomats in a country is to expand the relationship. They're the persons who are supposed to solve problems. We're in the midst of a big problem right now. From a Canadian perspective, about 5% of our population has roots in India. And so there's a number of Canadians who have Indian citizenship living in India who often want consular support. There's also a large number of Indians who want to come to Canada either to visit family or to immigrate, or our biggest source of foreign students are Indians. And so a lot of the people at our embassy are there processing the visa forms to enable Indians to come to Canada. We have very strong people-to-people ties, and these will endure. But if you remove the diplomats, it's going to make it much more difficult for Indians to be able to come to Canada to see family or to study or just to visit.
But don't you think that we have come to this pass purely because the Canadian Prime Minister made such a public allegation against India, and this is one of the ways for India to say that that was not right, and they're asking for parity to be now done.
Right, except I think that, for example, there's a lot more Chinese diplomats in Canada than there are Canadian diplomats in China. There's many more Mexican diplomats in the United States than there are American diplomats in the United States. That's not how countries operate. I've never seen this happen before, using this as a means to leverage. You're more familiar with trade sanctions or some form of economic sanction, but not throwing out the diplomats, because the diplomats are supposed to be the problem solvers. So I find this very curious and probably quite unhelpful in the long term for what has been a very strong relationship. I grant you that our Prime Minister made allegations which he has not substantiated, and I understand why the Indian government is so unhappy. I mean, if you put up wanted posters of Canadian diplomats, we'd be very unhappy as well. I think our foreign minister said this was unacceptable, and the Indians have replied, well, do something about it. And I think that's a fair claim, but I think removing the diplomats is not the way to solve this.
Overall, on Justin Trudeau's allegations, a lot of water has, flown under the bridge since those allegations were first made publicly. Do you get a sense that Justin Trudeau's administration is now realizing that maybe they didn't quite deal with this the best way, given India's response and the outrage over the Khalistani elements in Canada, and they should have done this privately, what they're now saying they will do with India?
I think there's probably a lot of rethinking, and because things have not turned out the way I think the Canadian government hoped it would. The initial effort, I think, after the Prime Minister's statement was to try to de-escalate. That has not happened. And so I think the Canadian government is now having to rethink how it does business. But again, I come back to the point that to do business, you have to have diplomats. They're the intermediaries. They're the messengers. And we are in a difficult situation. We should be able to work this out. So I'm not sure how this is going to end. I certainly those who want to expand trade with India, who want to visit India, are quite unhappy right now because, of course, India is not granting visas to any Canadians wanting to come to Canada. I don't think this is this is a useful way to try and resolve this. I think the pressure on the Canadian government to take action against those who have targeted Indian diplomats in particular is a fair point, and the Canadian government should react to that. We are, of course, a country of immigrants, and we probably are more liberal in our approach to freer speech than most other countries. This brings with it problems, as we certainly are now encountering with India and the concern over Khalistan and Sikh independentists.
It's not just about the fact that the diplomats were put under target. There was also a tableau on the assassination, the very brutal assassination of a former Indian Prime Minister that was actually paraded on streets in Canada. And there's nothing that happened. Indian embassies have come under attack. Indian flag has been disrespected. Now, given, of course, free speech is one element, but certainly violent speech or hate speech, for example, against Hindus in Canada, has also come to notice. So don't you think the Canadian government and the administration has overall failed in addressing these concerns? And then on top of that, the Prime Minister came out very publicly to accuse India of being behind Nijjar's killing, when that could have been handled maybe a little bit deftly behind the scenes.
Well, I think there's two things here. First of all, the handling of Sikh efforts to promote independence within India, and does that contravene Canadian laws? I think you refer specifically to the tableau, the assassination of former Prime Minister Gandhi. I think that this is something we should be looking at. The Europeans have passed legislation, the British have passed legislation on hate speech, and I think this probably would fit within that realm. But I think that's something our government probably should take action on because of the very real concerns of India and, of course, Indian diplomats. As for the Prime Minister's statement, certainly my sense is that he did not make this without feeling that there was intelligence that backed it up. But is this evidence? That's always a challenge. And can you make this public? Because I think some of this evidence that the government is citing, which I have not seen and Canadians have not seen, is based on foreign intercepts from partners in our Five Eyes intelligence community, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Britain. And I had understood that this had been shared with the Indian government. The Indian government has said, no, this is, I think, to use their words, absurd and not true. I don't know how this ends. Certainly, we were in a quandary, and we were looking to our other partners, like the United States, like Australia, to help us work our way through this. Like we're talking to British diplomats as well. Nobody wants to see this expand. Did the Prime Minister do this in a responsible fashion? That's certainly under debate here in Canada.
Right. What India has also said is that actually, I think Canada has accepted that what has been presented to India is actually verbal. They've not really seen anything concrete, either in terms of documents or any other proof. In that sense, isn't India justified in pushing back against Canada? Because, this is a very serious charge that has been made against Indian diplomats. In fact, Canada was the first one to send back an Indian diplomat when they made these public allegations. So many here feel that the escalation has always come from Canada and India has only just responded.
Right. Well, in rule of law countries, as we both are, evidence is an important part of the legal process. And I think my understanding was that they had shared some information, but I don't know this. We do not know what was shared with Indian authorities before the Prime Minister spoke in our House of Commons. I'd understood our national security advisor had visited India. Our senior diplomats had been meeting with their counterparts to discuss this. So this did not come completely out of the blue to, I think, Indian authorities or to Canadians. But I do think the turn of events has surprised Canadians. And the challenge now, as I say, is to work our way out of this, because the links between Canada and India are actually pretty strong, not just trade and economic, but the people-to-people ties are particularly strong. And, we've got almost 24 Canadians of Indian descent sitting in our House of Commons. So this is like a quarrel with a family in some ways, cousins, I'd put it, and somehow you got to work this out. But again, to do that, you rely on your diplomats, which is why sending the diplomats home, I think I've always found that an unfortunate approach. They always say if you're in troubles with a country, you bring your ambassador home. Well, your ambassador is the one person who usually has the best contacts the best network and is the most skilled. So why would you pull out your ambassador? The ambassadors are there to try and resolve problems. So I think that that's what we need to be doing, is focusing now on the diplomatic side of things. To do that, you need diplomats. There are other mechanisms I think the Indian government could take to voice their displeasure, but certainly there's no question in Canada that India is unhappy about what has happened. And I think that there's cause. Certainly the tableau you spoke about, the posters, these are, as our foreign minister said, unacceptable. But then it's up to Canada to take actions using our legal process to prevent this from happening.
Yes, I just, for the benefit of our viewers, I should also mention that even Niger, who has photographs and videos with weapons, even the community back in Canada is actually celebrating him as a member of the Khalistani Tiger Force, which is a proscribed terror organization in India. All of that obviously does not, make Indians feel like Canada has responded adequately enough to the issues that we had been bringing, not just on Niger, but on other elements as well. But on that note, Colin Robertson, I do thank you for joining us, and thanks a lot for sharing your perspective on the diplomatic row.
Thank you.
Thank you.